everyone, it's Kate Hogarth. I'm a lecturer in the School of Accountancy at QUT. I'm also a chartered accountant and I'm here just to guide you through development of multiple choice questions. So multiple choice questions contain three elements. They have the item stem. So we call this the problem statement. It contains all the information necessary to answer the multiple choice question. We obviously have a correct option. So this is the correct answer to the multiple choice question. We then have what we call distractors. So these are incorrect answers presented as alternatives to the correct answer. Now, when designing your multiple choice questions, it's important to consider the Bloom's taxonomy. So this defines what or how you can design your multiple choice questions. So obviously the lower order learning of remembering and understanding is what multiple choice questions often target, but you can design your multiple choice questions to test some of the higher order learning levels, such as applying, analyzing, and evaluating. So let's go through some of them. So obviously knowledge is the lowest level of learning. It's essentially remembering previous learnt material, and this would obviously be the easiest type of multiple choice question to create. When we think of the learning objectives at this level, it's things like known common terms, known specific facts, known methods and procedures, basic concepts or principles. When you're designing the questions, the type of verbs you'd use for knowledge questions are define, list, state, identify, label, name, or things like who, when, what, or where. The next level then is comprehension. So this is all about being able to grasp the meaning of the material. So you can actually have your students translate material from one form to the other, to interpret material, to estimate future trends. So when we think about what type of learning objectives we'd use for a comprehensive question, it would be understanding facts, interpreting or translating material, applying a formula, or estimating future consequences applied in the data. The type of verbs you'd use when you're designing comprehensive questions are things like explain, predict, interpret, infer, summarize, convert, translate, etc. Next level up then is the actual application. So this is being able to use learnt material in new and different ways. So here we apply rules and methods and concepts to new situations, or we solve problems. So the way you'd word your questions if you were targeting this level would, how could this be used for that? Or how would you show this? Or make use of X, or modify, or solve, or apply these types of conditions. So you could look at things like solving particular problems within the accounting context. Next level then is the analysis. So this refers to being able to break down material into components so that the whole thing can be understood. So the type of learning objectives is to recognize unstated assumptions, distinguish between facts and inferences, or evaluate the relevancy of data. So when you're designing these questions, the type of verbs you'd use is to differentiate, to compare and contrast, to distinguish something from something else, or how would something affect or relate, or what piece of something is missing is also an analysis type question. The next one then is to synthesize. So this is putting the parts together to form something new. So propose a plan. So you could give a small, couple of line case and have them come up with a recommendation, A, B, C, or D, to integrate learning from different areas to solve a problem. So the type of verbs we'd use is design, construct, develop, formulate, imagine, create, and so on. The last one then is to evaluate. So this is the highest level of learning. This is concerned with being able to judge the value of material. So we judge the logical consistency, the adequacy, which conclusions are supported. So when you're designing your question, the type of verbs we have is, appraise, evaluate, which option would be better or preferable. So again, you could have A, B, C, and D, and you could have one of them being, the most preferred option, and then the others being the distractor. All right, so what about the process? So when we start designing multiple choice questions, it's really about singling out what are you actually testing. So you need to have a single idea for each particular multiple choice questions. We always say it's better to word them positively, but if you're going to use a negative, as in which one not or which doesn't apply, then make sure you underline and capitalize it. Make sure you minimize reading. So don't use a lot of window dressing or excess baggage that's not really needed to answer the question. If you want to have a bit of a case, what we sometimes do is have the case and then have, a couple of, 3 or 4 or 5 multiple choice questions related to the same case. All right, when you're writing then the correct option and the distractors, having one correct answer is ideal, but you can also have the best or most preferred answer as well. So there's 2 ways to actually design your question. It's better to have 4 to 5 choices. 3 tends to be the questions are too easy, and 6 the questions are too hard. We often say that you should avoid using all of the above because it really is hard to distinguish between students who know it really is all of the above from students who've worked out it's more than one of them. So you don't sort of get that distinguishing factor which you need for summative assessment. All right, so some of the rules to writing multiple choice questions is really to balance the key. So this refers to where you place the correct answer. So you should vary. You shouldn't always have them as C or D. So if you're writing a collection of them, make sure you balance that. As I said before, try and avoid the use of none of the above because they're less reliable type of questions. Avoid complex multiple choice. So you should not have complex responses that combine many smaller items. Keep the length of your responses fairly consistently, so all of your response options should be approximately the same so that students can't figure out the correct answer by looking at the length of the answer. Avoid grammatical clues, so don't use any clues that would let them know the correct answer. We often say avoid humour when develop the options because sometimes this can actually distract students too much. And then lastly, keep the stem as simple as possible. So don't add extra information to fill up space or confuse the students. All right, next, avoid using negative phrasing such as never or not, but if you do it, make sure you bold it and capitalize it. Use what we call plausible distractors. So all of your options should really be logical and related to the material. So don't make them too, nonsense or foolish that it's obvious they're not the right answer because that makes your questions really easy. We always say avoid using all of the above. Only ask one question for each multiple choice. Use simple terminology, so spell out any acronyms or define difficult to understand terms. Underline, italicize, or use bold print to draw attention to any important facts. I've said that before, so limit your options to 4 or 5. Don't take phrases directly from your text or your lecture or your class because that makes the questions really about recall and not understanding. So you need to sort of reword them. If it's a phrase you use all the time to describe something on the accounting statement or the balance sheet, etc., make sure you reword it so it makes it a bit difficult. Obviously, make sure the questions are not biased or contain sexist terminology such as calling women girls because we find that distracts some students. from the actual questions. I always find it's easier to write the correct answer first, then think about how you can write around the distractors. So with numbers, it's pretty easy. You just change the numbers, but you make them obvious. So, you know, if you're adding up things, you might just take off one of the liabilities or take off one of the assets, so that the students that don't know it well enough might not get that one right. With words, it's a little more difficult, but you've still got to make them all logical. Obviously, make them responses vertical because it makes it easier to read. And avoid repetition. So if you had, for example, every one of your answers had in the, you then put in the stem rather than have it in each of the questions. Here's just a couple of examples I've done up. So when the presentation or reclassification of items in the financial report is amended, the following information must also be amended. And then I've listed A, B, C, or D. And you can see how they're all very similar. So this is what we call the stem. So this is the question. I've thought about what am I trying to get the students to understand or to provide me the answer to. We then have the correct answer, because obviously the nature, the amount, and the reason for the reclassification is required to be disclosed. The other three answers are the distractors. So A, the impact of reclassification on profit and loss isn't required. C, the effect of reclassification of total assets is not required. And D, the impact of reclassification on cash flows is also not required. Next one then. So the term other financial assets is used for the presentation of items that do not fit easily into the categories of. So then I've put, one of them is quite obviously not right because it's not an asset, but the other three answers could quite easily if the student didn't know the answer. So that's obviously our stem. Our correct answer is C, because financial assets do not easily fit into categories of cash receivable and are classified as other financial assets. The other three are obviously distractors. You would not classify goodwill or amortization as a financial assets. Neither would you prepayment, and obviously D, these items are liabilities, not assets. So I've made them a little bit more difficult. You'll see with D, you might say, well, why would you put D in there? Because it's obviously wrong. But if a student didn't necessarily read the question correctly, they might just think, oh, well, D is the only one that's odd, so that must be the right answer. So you can see how that can be a distraction. All right, well, hopefully that's helped you. And yeah, good luck writing your multiple choice questions. Thank you.